I am a police officer with over a decade of experience working in a city that has its ups and downs in terms of crime. Over the years, I have experienced situations that made me question human nature and tested my limits. One such situation still remains vivid in my memory. It was a cold, quiet autumn night. I was on a night shift, the kind of night you expect to be calm, but sometimes surprises you with the unexpected. The call came around 2 a.m. A trembling voice on the phone reported strange behavior from a neighbor. It was one of those calls that you feel deep down won't be something ordinary. Arriving at the scene, the silence of the night was almost palpable. The caller, visibly shaken, described a man pacing back and forth in his backyard, talking to himself and acting strangely. It wasn't a typical scene of violence or crime, but there was something unsettling about it. With caution, I approached the house. The backyard was poorly lit, but I could see the man's silhouette. He seemed to be in an altered state of consciousness, possibly under the influence of some substance. What happened next was something I'll never forget. The man, upon noticing my presence, started shouting about voices he said he was hearing. His words were disjointed, talking about how these voices were chasing him and ordering him to do terrible things. I tried to calm him down, keeping a safe distance. It was clear he needed medical and psychiatric help. But in the blink of an eye, the situation escalated. He pulled something out of his pocket that looked like a weapon. Instinctively, I prepared my own weapon, but my mind was desperately seeking a peaceful solution. That's when I realized that the object was not a weapon, but rather an old portable radio, which he believed to be the source of the voices that tormented him. The tension of the moment gave way to profound sadness as I saw a clearly disturbed man struggling against demons that only he could hear. With the help of reinforcements that arrived shortly after, we managed to calm him down and convince him to hand over the radio. It was a tremendous relief to see that the situation did not end in violence. He was taken for medical evaluation, and I later learned that he suffered from severe schizophrenia. This incident made me reflect on the many faces of humanity and the fine line that separates sanity from madness. In this profession, every day is a new journey, full of uncertainties. We, as police officers, are often seen only as enforcers of the law, but often find ourselves as the first responders in situations that require compassion and empathy as much as courage and assertiveness. That night was a solemn reminder that, behind every call, there is a human story, often filled with complexities and unimaginable challenges. Working at the Eldridge Police Department for over a decade, I, Jack Sullivan, thought I had seen it all. But nothing could prepare me for the quiet night that turned into a mystery and fear on Hawthorne Street. It was around 2 a.m. when the dispatcher's call reached me. "Sullivan, we have a situation on Hawthorne Street." Reports of screams coming from a seemingly abandoned house at the end of the street. I knew the urban legends of that street, but I never paid much attention to them. I grabbed my kit, checked my gun, and headed to the location. The street was deserted, and the only sound I heard was my footsteps on the asphalt. The house was at the end of the street, shrouded in shadows and with an aura of abandonment. I felt a chill down my spine as I approached. The house had broken windows, and the front door was ajar. I entered, flashlight in hand, announcing my presence. "Eldridge Police? If anyone is here, identify yourself." My voice echoed through the empty corridors. On the first floor, the house seemed to have been looted years ago. But what caught my attention were fresh footprints in the dust leading upstairs. With my heart beating faster, I followed the footprints. At the top, there were 3 doors, 2 closed, 1 ajar. It was from this door that I heard the muffled sound of someone crying. I pushed the door open, and the scene before me left me perplexed. A woman sitting on the floor, crying. "They are everywhere," as she whispered when I asked who was following her, pointing to the walls. "The family, they died here." As I spoke to her, I heard a noise coming from one of the other doors. I left her in the room and went to investigate. There, I found only an old porcelain doll in a chair, staring at me. The situation was becoming bizarre and frightening. When I returned to fetch the woman, she had disappeared. I ran back to the corridor and saw her descending the stairs, laughing in a disturbing way. I followed her to the basement, where she stood in a circle of candles, muttering unintelligible words. The walls were covered in strange symbols and old photos of the family that died in that house. I tried to approach her to take her outside, but she reacted violently. When reinforcements arrived, we managed to get her out of the house safely. We later discovered that she was a local historian, obsessed with the history of the house. I never forgot that night on Hawthorne Street. The rational explanation for what happened did not erase the memories of the whispers and laughter I heard in that house. Whenever I pass by Hawthorne Street, I feel as if I am being watched by the shadows of that abandoned house. The invisible gazes of the family that died there seem to follow me, whispering secrets of the past that I will never be able to fully unravel. To this day, when the radio crackles with a new call in the dead of night, a part of me hopes to hear again about Hawthorne Street. And, as much as I try, I can't shake the feeling that something unexplored and perhaps unexplainable happened in that house. It is a constant reminder that, behind the normality of our small town, there are mysteries that not even years of police experience can solve. That night on Hawthorne Street changed the way I see my job and my city. It showed me that there is more to the world than what our eyes can see, and that some stories, no matter how strange, carry within them a core of truth that sometimes we would prefer to ignore. I, Lucas Hartwell, have always felt at ease with the dark, rainy nights of my small coastal town. Working in the police department for over 15 years, I thought I had seen it all. But on that stormy night, something happened that challenged everything I knew. It was one of those nights where the wind blows fiercely and the waves crash violently against the rocks. I was in my patrol car, lost in thoughts with the monotonous sound of rain hitting the roof, when a radio call interrupted the silence. Attention all units, report of a serious accident on the coastal road near Elden Lighthouse. Elden Lighthouse, an old structure surrounded by local ghostly legends. I felt a knot in my stomach as I sped towards the location. Arriving there, I saw an overturned car near the lighthouse. The rain made visibility difficult, but I managed to approach the vehicle with my flashlight. I called for survivors, but no one responded. Inside the car, I found an unconscious young woman. She was alive. I called an ambulance and stayed by her side, trying to offer some comfort while help was on its way. That's when I heard something that caught my attention, a strange sound coming from the lighthouse, like banging on a metal door. Driven by curiosity and concern, I decided to investigate. The lighthouse door was ajar and creaking with the wind. Entering, I felt an immediate change in the atmosphere. The interior was cold and silent, a stark contrast to the storm outside. I climbed the spiral staircase, my flashlight illuminating the peeling, abandoned walls. At the top of the lighthouse, I found the source of the sound. An old valve radio turned on, emitting static noise. A chair beside it was overturned, as if someone had left in a hurry. A shiver ran through me. The radio shouldn't be working. The lighthouse had been deactivated for years. As I approached the radio, I heard a weak, distorted voice. "Help me, please," it whispered, almost swallowed by the static. I tried to respond, but there was no reaction. The feeling that something was very wrong grew inside me. I decided to quickly descend and return to my car. When I got back to the car, I saw the ambulance was already there, attending to the woman from the accident. I reported what I found in the lighthouse, but the paramedics and other officers seemed skeptical. "That lighthouse has been abandoned for years, Hartwell. Must have been your imagination with this storm and all," one of them said. After the night at Elden Lighthouse, I began to question what really happened. The voice on the radio, the strange circumstances of the accident, everything seemed inexplicably intertwined. But deep down, I knew I needed concrete answers. A few days later, I decided to return to the lighthouse during the day. In the sunlight, the place seemed less menacing, more a forgotten relic than a horror movie setting. Thoroughly searching the place, I made a surprising discovery. An old set of radio equipment hidden in a secret chamber under the floor. Investigating further, I found that the equipment belonged to the last lighthouse keeper of Elden, an amateur radio enthusiast. This discovery made me reconsider the voice I had heard. Maybe it was an old broadcast, stuck in a loop due to the deterioration of the equipment. and the storm that night had somehow activated the system. It was an unusual explanation, but plausible. As for the woman I rescued, she fully recovered and claimed to have no memory of the accident. Digging deeper, I found she had a history of sleepwalking. Perhaps, in a stress-induced sleepwalking state, she had driven to the lighthouse and suffered the accident. In the end, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, but in a less spectacular way than I had initially imagined. Elden Lighthouse was not the epicenter of paranormal activities, but rather a place where several unfortunate events and coincidences intertwined to create a story that seemed, at first glance, supernatural. This experience taught me the importance of maintaining a critical eye and seeking logical explanations, even when confronted with the seemingly inexplicable. Still, every time I pass by the lighthouse, I can't help but feel a hint of doubt. In the world of investigation, I've learned that not all questions have clear answers, and some stories remain, in a way, undefined. It started on a cold October night. I, a police veteran of nearly 2 decades, had never believed in horror stories or things I couldn't see or touch. That night, however, changed everything. We were on duty, me and Ricardo, a rookie full of energy. The station was quiet, only the sound of the communication radio and the clicks of keyboards accompanied us. I was reviewing some reports when Ricardo called me, his voice a bit shaky. "Did you hear that?" he asked, looking towards the dark corridor. "Hear what?" I hadn't heard anything except the constant hum of the fluorescent light above us. "Footsteps," he said, "in the corridor." I stood up and walked to the door, looking down the corridor. It was empty. The lights flickered irregularly, creating dancing shadows on the walls. "It must be the building," I said. "You know, it's old, makes strange noises sometimes." Ricardo didn't seem convinced, but he returned to his work. So did I. However, half an hour later, I heard the sound. Clear and distinct footsteps, but no one in sight. My heart sped up. "Ricardo, did you hear that now?" "Yes," he replied, standing up. "Let's check it out together." We walked down the corridor, the lights still flickering. As we approached the file room, the footsteps stopped. We opened the door slowly, but the room was empty. Nothing out of place. We returned to our desks, confused. I tried to rationalize, saying maybe it was rats in the ceiling, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that. The footsteps were heavy, like those of an adult walking firmly. Hours passed, and the footsteps continued. Sometimes near, sometimes distant. Ricardo was pale, constantly looking around. I myself felt a chill down my spine, a sensation that we were not alone. Then, something even stranger happened. One of the doors, the interrogation room door, slammed shut. We ran there, guns drawn, but the room was empty. No open windows or any other explanation for the occurrence. The silence was sepulchral, only our agitated breaths filling the air. It was Ricardo who noticed first. "Look," he whispered, pointing to the one-way mirror in the interrogation room. There were handprints, as if someone had pressed their palms against the glass from the other side. But it was impossible, as we were alone in the station. We decided to check the security cameras, hoping to find a logical explanation. Sitting in front of the monitors, we reviewed the night's recordings. Everything seemed normal until we reached the moment of the door slamming. To our surprise and horror, we saw the door shut violently by itself, with no one around. And on the glass, the handprints appeared out of nowhere, as if pressed by an invisible force. At that moment, we heard another noise coming from the corridor. This time, it was different, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. We armed ourselves again and went to investigate, but found only emptiness and silence. We returned, frightened and speechless. We sat down, trying to process what was happening. There was no rational explanation. The hours passed slowly, with the sound of footsteps and inexplicable noises continuing to haunt us. When dawn arrived, everything ceased. The sun brought a sense of normality, but the night had changed something in us. Ricardo, in particular, seemed a shadow of the confident young man he was. It was a typical autumn night, with a light mist covering the road that cut through the forest. I was on patrol, enjoying the calm of the night, when I spotted something strange on the road ahead. A car, a black sedan, was parked haphazardly on the shoulder. There were no signs of another vehicle or an accident. I approached, turning on the emergency lights, expecting to find someone in need of help. As I got closer, I noticed that the car's engine was still running. The interior light was on, but there was no one in the driver's seat, nor in the passenger seat, nor in the back. The car's radio was on, playing an old song, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. There was an open map on the passenger seat and a spilled cup of coffee on the floor. I called in on the radio, reporting the situation. My instinct told me that something was wrong. I began to inspect the area around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness of the night. That's when I saw something on the ground, a few meters from the car. A hand, a severed human hand, with a ring still on the finger. Shock hit me like a punch. I immediately called for backup, my voice trembling on the radio. While waiting, I tried to piece together the situation. Who owned the car? Whose hand was it? What happened here? The investigation team arrived quickly, starting to work. The area was cordoned off, and the experts began to collect evidence. I stood there, watching, trying to understand. The initial findings were even more confusing. The car was registered in the name of a woman who had disappeared weeks ago. There were no signs of struggle or violence inside the car. The hand, we later discovered, belonged to an unknown man, not related to the missing woman. Days turned into weeks. The investigation continued, but each new discovery only added more questions. Why was the missing woman's car there? Whose hand was it? And most disturbingly, where were the owners? I returned to that road several times, trying to find something I had missed, some clue that would lead us to an answer. But the road remained silent, keeping its secrets. To this day, the case remains open. Sometimes, when I'm on that road, I think about that night, about the abandoned car and the severed hand. And I wonder if we will ever know the truth about what happened on that road of oblivion.